The hand came down at 11:47 on a Tuesday night in March, in a private hospital room on the 8th floor of Meridian Medical Center, and I want you to understand something before I tell you what happened next. I want you to understand that I had been silent for 3 years, not because I was afraid, not because I did not know what was happening to me, not because the women in my family had modeled silence as survival and I was simply following a pattern I had inherited. I had been silent because I had made a specific calculation, the way women who are married to men with enormous power and enormous reach make calculations, and the calculation was this: the cost of speaking was higher than the cost of silence, and the cost of silence was something I believed I could absorb until the moment I had enough to make the speaking matter. I had been wrong about the absorbing. I was not wrong about the speaking. My name is Serena Adiz Whitmore Osa. I am 33 years old. My husband's name is Marcus Whitmore. At the time of the hospital room, he was 39 years old and the founder and CEO of Whitmore Capital Group, which was a private equity and real estate conglomerate with $6.2 billion in assets and offices in 7 cities, and a board of directors that had never once, in 11 years, asked Marcus Whitmore why his wife always had bruises that could be explained. My father's name is Dr. Emmanuel Osa. He is 61 years old. He is the founder and CEO of Osai Tech Global, which is a technology infrastructure company with $14.8 billion in annual revenue, operations in 31 countries, and a legal department staffed by 47 attorneys who are, as I would come to understand in the months after the hospital room, very good at their jobs. My father did not know what Marcus had been doing to me for 3 years. I had been protecting him from knowing. I had been wrong about that, too. The morning after the hospital room, when my father drove 4 hours in the middle of the night to stand beside my bed and look at what his son-in-law had done to the face of his only daughter, he said something that I will carry for the rest of my life. He said, "Serena, I need you to tell me everything. From the beginning," and I did. "What happened after that is the reason you are here. Before the hospital room, I need to take you to the beginning. Because the beginning is where the story lives, and because understanding how I got there means understanding why I stayed, and why staying was not weakness, and why leaving required what it required, and why what my father did when he finally knew was not revenge, but something more precise than that, something more considered and more complete. I met Marcus Whitmore when I was 26 years old at a charity gala in New York City, where my father's company was a presenting sponsor, and where Marcus had arrived with the specific energy of a man who understood that rooms like that one were currency, and who spent that currency deliberately. He was handsome in the way that men with money and confidence and the specific grooming that comes from both are handsome, polished, contained, emanating the particular warmth of someone who has decided to be charming in a particular direction. He decided to be charming in my direction. I was 26. I had a master's degree in international development from Georgetown. I was working at a nonprofit focused on education access in West Africa. I was my father's daughter in the ways that mattered. I was direct. I was disciplined. I had opinions and I expressed them, and I had been raised by a man who treated my opinions as worth hearing from the time I was old enough to have them. I had never met anyone like Marcus before. I had met powerful men. My father's world was full of powerful men. But Marcus had a quality that was different from the powerful men I knew, and it took me years to be able to name the quality accurately, which is that he did not simply want to be powerful in the world. He wanted to be the most powerful presence in every room he entered, including rooms that were only the two of us. I did not see that at 26. At 26, I saw a man who was interested in everything I said, and who called when he said he would call, and who flew to Accra to meet my extended family 3 months into our relationship, which my grandmother described as the gesture of a serious man, and who proposed at 18 months on the rooftop of the restaurant where we had our first dinner. My father had a question when I told him about the engagement. He said, "What do you know about who he is when things don't go his way?" I said, "He's even-tempered. He's patient." My father said, "A man in his position who has never been told no by anyone with more power than him is patient when things are going his way." "What happens when they stop?" I said, "Dad," he said, "I'm asking because I love you, not because I don't like him." I said, "I know who he is. I was wrong." But I did not know that at 26, with a ring on my finger and a rooftop, and the specific happiness of someone who believes they have arrived at the life they were building toward. The first time Marcus hit me was 14 months after the wedding. I need to say that plainly because it is the truth, and because truth is what this story requires. Not a shove, not a grab. A closed fist blow to the side of my head in the kitchen of our Manhattan penthouse on a Sunday evening in November, after an argument that had begun as a disagreement about a dinner we were supposed to attend, and that had escalated in the specific way that arguments with Marcus escalated, which was not toward volume but toward temperature, a dropping of warmth, a cooling of the atmosphere. A series of statements delivered in a low, controlled voice that were designed not to resolve the disagreement, but to establish that the disagreement had been wrong to exist. I had said something that I will not repeat here because it does not matter what I said. What matters is that I said it, that I held a position and held it clearly and did not retreat from it when the temperature dropped, and that the blow was the response to the holding. I was on the kitchen floor. I was aware of the specific quality of the tile against my cheek. Marcus stood above me. He said, in the same controlled voice, "That will not happen again if you understand what you are doing when you speak to me that way." I said nothing. He went to his study. I sat on the kitchen floor for a long time, then I got up. I did not call my father. I want to explain why, because the why matters, and because people who have never been in the specific architecture of that kind of relationship do not always understand the why. The why is this. Marcus Whitmore was a $6 billion man in a world where $6 billion men are very rarely held accountable for anything, and where the women who speak about what $6 billion men do behind closed doors are very frequently not believed, and where not being believed while married to a $6 billion man has consequences that are different in kind from not being believed in other circumstances. The why is that I had seen what happened to women who spoke and were not believed. The why is that I needed to be certain before I spoke, and certain meant documented, and documented meant time. I began documenting, not immediately, not from the first incident. I began in the 7th month after the first incident, when it had happened 4 more times, and I had understood that it was not an incident but a pattern, and patterns are documentable in ways that incidents are not. I bought a journal, not digital, paper with a lock, kept inside the hollowed interior of a decorative book on the 3rd shelf of my home library, where Marcus never went because Marcus did not read. I wrote dates and descriptions and the specific words he used. I photographed bruises with the front camera of a phone that I maintained separately from the phone Marcus knew about, a prepaid device that lived in the same hollowed book as the journal. I built the documentation over 3 years. I was building it when I got pregnant. The pregnancy was not planned in the way that some pregnancies are not planned, not unwanted, not the result of carelessness, but the result of a specific night in December that I have thought about many times since, and that I believe Marcus experienced as a reconciliation after a period of cold distance, and that I experienced as something more complicated than that, as the complicated thing that intimacy becomes inside a relationship with violence in it. I found out in January. I did not tell Marcus immediately. I told my best friend, a woman named Yetund Ademi, who had been my closest friend since graduate school and who was the one person who knew some portion of the truth about my marriage, not the full scope of it, but enough. Yetund said, "Serena, this changes everything. You need to tell your father." I said, "Not yet." She said, "When?" I said, "When I have everything." She said, "You have been saying when I have everything for 2 years." I said, "I know, I'm close." She said, "Serena, you are pregnant. The calculation is different now." I said, I know the calculation is different. Give me time to understand the new calculation." She said, "How much time?" I said, "I don't know yet." What I did not tell Yetund was that the documentation I had been building for 3 years was nearly complete in the sense that mattered most. I had the journal. I had the photographs. I had the medical records from 3 visits to urgent care over 3 years. Visits I had made for injuries that I had described as domestic accidents, falls, a cabinet door, a car door, and which were documented in medical charts that told the truth in the injuries even when the stated cause was false. And I had one more thing, the thing I had been building toward for 6 months, which I will tell you about when the time in the story is right. I told Marcus about the pregnancy on a Saturday morning in February over breakfast in the specific careful way that I managed disclosures to Marcus that might produce volatility. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I see." I said, "I'm approximately 8 weeks." He said, "And you're certain it's mine?" I looked at him across the breakfast table. I said, "What?" He said, "You heard me." I said, "Marcus." "What are you?" He said, "I'm asking a simple question. Answer it." I said, "Yes, of course." "There is no question." He said, "Good. Then we'll proceed accordingly." I said, "Proceed accordingly." He said, "Yes." He picked up his coffee cup and went back to the newspaper he had been reading. That was Marcus's version of receiving the news of his first child. I sat at the breakfast table and I put my hand on my stomach and I said silently to the child inside me, "I am working on it. I promise I am working on it. The hospital room was the conclusion of a series of events that began in March, 6 weeks after the pregnancy announcement, when Marcus came home from a board meeting in a state that I had learned to read over 3 years the way you learn to read weather. The specific quality of the silence when he entered the house, the particular set of his jaw, the temperature drop that preceded the storm. The board meeting had not gone the way he wanted. I will not go into the details of the business matter, because the business matter is not the point. What matters is that Marcus came home with the temperature drop in full effect, and that I was 7 months pregnant, and that I made a mistake that evening that I had learned not to make in 3 years of learning, but made anyway because pregnancy changes your body, and your body changes your reflexes, and the reflexes that had kept me calibrated for 3 years were operating differently. I pushed back. Not about the business matter, about something minor, something domestic, something that in a different marriage would have been resolved in 30 seconds and forgotten. But in this marriage, there was no minor. There was only the temperature and whether you managed it correctly, and that evening I did not manage it correctly. He hit me in the living room, then in the hallway. Then I fell against the edge of the doorframe. I was 7 months pregnant. I called 911. This was not the first time I had wanted to call 911. It was the first time I did it because a 7-month pregnancy is not something you absorb the way you absorb other things. It changes the calculation the way Yetund had said it would. When you are alone in your own body, you can decide what risks to accept. When there is another person inside yours, the calculation is not yours to make unilaterally. The ambulance came. Marcus was very calm by the time the paramedics arrived. He is always very calm after. The specific calm of a man who has released something and is now composed. He rode in the ambulance beside me holding my hand and speaking to the paramedics with the measured concern of a devoted husband, and the paramedics, who see what they see and know what they know, wrote their report in the language that paramedics use when the stated cause does not align with the injury pattern. At Meridian Medical Center, they took me to the 8th floor, to a private room, and a doctor came and an attending nurse came, and the attending nurse was a woman named Gloria Reeves who looked at me with the specific look of a woman who has looked at women like me in rooms like this many times, and who does not say what she knows but is asking what I want to do with what she knows. I looked at her. I said, "My name is Serena Osai Whitmore. My father is Emmanuel Osai. I need you to call him." "Not my husband, my father." She said, "I can do that." I said, "Please do it now, before my husband comes back from the waiting room." She said, "Do you want me to call anyone else?" "The police," I said. "The police are coming. I already spoke to one of the paramedics, but I need my father here first." She said, "I understand." She left the room. At 11:47, while she was gone and before my father arrived, Marcus came back from the waiting room. He looked at me in the hospital bed. Said, "What did you tell them?" I said, "The truth." He looked at me for a long moment. He said, "Serena, think about what you're doing." I said, "I have been thinking about what I'm doing for 3 years." He said, "You don't understand what happens if." I said, "I understand exactly what happens. I have been understanding it and preparing for it for 3 years. I need you to leave this room now." He said, "This is not how this works. I'm your husband." I said, "You are my husband. I am calling my father." I am speaking to the police. And everything I have documented for 3 years is already in the hands of my attorney, who I called from this bed 20 minutes ago and whose office has instructions that were prepared 6 months ago for exactly this moment. He stared at me. I said, "Leave this room, Marcus." He stepped toward me. He raised his hand, and the door opened. My father, Emmanuel Osai, is not a physically large man. He is 5 feet 10 inches, lean, with close-cropped silver hair and the specific bearing of someone who has built something significant from nothing, and who carries the weight of that building not in his body, but in his presence, in the quality of stillness he brings into a room, in the way that rooms reorganize themselves around him not because of performance, but because of reality. He had driven 4 hours in the middle of the night. He stood in the doorway of room 817 at Meridian Medical Center, and he looked at Marcus Whitmore's raised hand, and he looked at his daughter in the hospital bed, and he looked at the face of his only child. And whatever Emmanuel Osai felt in that moment, he did not express as volume. He expressed it as the specific quality of a man who has just understood something completely and has already begun calculating what comes next. He said, "Marcus." That was all. One word. Marcus lowered his hand. My father walked into the room. He did not look at Marcus again. He walked to the side of my bed and he looked at my face, at what Marcus had done to my face, and he took my hand in both of his and he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said to Marcus, without turning, "You need to leave this room now. If you are still in this room in 30 seconds, I will call the 2 officers who are currently at the nurse's station and they will remove you." Marcus said, "Emmanuel." "I understand this looks," my father said. 25 seconds. Marcus left. My father sat in the chair beside my bed. He held my hand. He did not speak for a long time. Then he said, "Serena, tell me everything, from the beginning," and I did. I told him everything for the first time in 3 years. I told him with the specific relief of a woman who has been carrying a weight alone and has finally given it to someone who has the capacity to carry it with her, not instead of her but with her, which is what fathers who have built something from nothing know how to do. I talked for 2 hours. My father listened for 2 hours. He did not interrupt. He did not express what he was feeling in his face, which is a quality he has that I have always recognized as one of the signs of his particular kind of intelligence, the ability to receive information completely before responding to it. When I finished, he sat for a moment. Then he said, "The documentation, the attorney, tell me." I told him about the journal, the photographs, the medical records, the prepaid phone. And I told him about the thing I had been building for 6 months that I had not told Yetund about, the thing I had been waiting for the right moment to tell him about. 6 months earlier, I had engaged a forensic accountant. Her name was Dr. Patricia Amo, and she was one of the most respected forensic financial analysts in the country, and she had spent 6 months, at my direction, and with the documentation I had been quietly and carefully assembling, examining the financial structure of Whitmore Capital Group. What she had found was not simply relevant to a divorce proceeding. What she had found was relevant to a federal investigation. I told my father what she had found. My father was quiet for a very long time. Then he said, "How many copies of the documentation exist?" I said, 3. One with my attorney. One in a secure location I will describe to you. One that I carried here tonight. He said, "In the hospital," I said. "In the lining of the bag I packed when the ambulance came." I packed it because I knew if I called 911 tonight, this might be the last time I was in that apartment. My father looked at me. He said, "You packed a bag." I said, "I have had a bag packed for 8 months. He was quiet. He said, "Your mother would be so proud of you." I said, "Not yet, I'm not done." He said, "No, you're not. Neither am I. Before I go further, I need to stop and speak directly to everyone watching Black Diamonds right now. Subscribe to this channel. Right now, before this story goes any further. Hit the bell notification. Because this channel exists for this story. For every woman who has been packing a bag in her mind for months. For every daughter whose father didn't know. For every person who has been building documentation in a hollowed-out book because they understood that speaking required preparation and preparation required time. Subscribe and drop your name and your city in the comments below. Tell me where in the world you are watching from tonight. Tell me if this story is finding you. Tell me if you know someone who needs to hear it. This community is real, and it is here for exactly this. Now let me tell you what my father did. Emmanuel Ose returned to his hotel at 4 in the morning. I know this because he called me at 4:15 to confirm that he had arrived and that the documentation I had described was where I said it was, which he verified with the attorney on a 3-way call that lasted 11 minutes. At 7 in the morning, he was in the offices of Osai Williams and Park, the law firm that had handled Osai Tech's legal affairs for 22 years and whose managing partner, a woman named Dr. Adiz Williams, no relation to me, was, as my father described her, the most strategically sophisticated legal mind he had worked with in 4 decades of building things. I know the details of what happened in that office because my father told me, and because Dr. Williams told me later in the context of the proceedings, and because some of what happened in that office became part of the public record. My father walked in at 7 in the morning with 2 things: the documentation I had given him and a clarity of purpose that Dr. Williams described to me later as the most focused she had ever seen him in 22 years. He said, "I need you to read this. All of it, and then I need you to tell me what we can do with it and how fast we can do it." Dr. Williams read the documentation. It took her 3 hours. At 10 in the morning, she looked up from the documents and said, "Emmanuel, I need to make some calls." The calls she made were to 3 people. The first was a senior partner in a family law practice with specific expertise in high-asset divorce proceedings. The second was a criminal defense attorney, not for my father, for me, to ensure that my position in the criminal proceedings against Marcus was fully protected. The third call was to a contact at the Securities and Exchange Commission. That third call is where the story turns. I need to tell you what Dr. Patricia Amo had found in the 6 months she spent inside the financial architecture of Whitmore Capital Group. Because what she found is the engine of what happened next, and because it deserves to be stated clearly. Marcus Whitmore had been operating a series of transactions within Whitmore Capital Group that, in the technical language of securities law, constituted fraudulent conveyance, market manipulation, and in one specific transaction involving a public company in which Whitmore Capital held a significant position, insider trading. The insider trading was the most serious of the three. It was also the most documented. Dr. Ammo had traced a pattern of transactions over 4 years in which Marcus had received non-public information through a contact on the board of a publicly traded healthcare company, had used that information to establish positions in the company before major announcements, and had generated approximately $43 million in proceeds from those positions. The paper trail was, as Dr. Ammo described it in her report, unusually intact. Because Marcus had been careful about his personal behavior, but not careful enough about his financial behavior. And because men who believe they are the smartest person in every room they enter tend to leave evidence in the rooms they believe no one is watching. I had been watching. I had been watching for 6 months with Dr. Ammo's help because I had known, from 3 years of being close to Marcus's business dealings, that there was something in the financial structure that was not clean. I had not known what. I had given Dr. Ammo access to documents that Marcus had left accessible in the shared spaces of our life, not his secured files, not anything I had obtained improperly, and she had built the picture from what was visible. The picture was $43 million and 4 years of systematic fraud. Dr. Williams's call to her SEC contact on that Tuesday morning was the beginning of a process that moved, in the specific way that federal investigations move when the documentation is already complete and the source is credible, with a speed that surprised people who did not understand how well prepared the source had been. But I am getting ahead of the timeline. Let me take you back to the hospital. The police had come to room 817 while my father was still there. 2 officers and a detective. The detective was a woman named Sergeant Amma Quarty, who had, as she told me later, been responding to domestic violence calls for 11 years, and who looked at the documentation I provided, photographs, journal entries. The specific medical record that the urgent care physician had annotated 3 years earlier with language that was, in the clear light of the full picture, unambiguous, with the expression of someone who has been waiting for the complete case to arrive. She took my statement for 2 hours. She was thorough, and she was kind in the specific way that competent people are kind, not sentimental, not performative, but attentive and precise, treating me as a credible adult woman with information that mattered. At the end, she said, "Mrs. Whitmore Osai, based on what you've provided and the medical evidence, I am recommending charges of felony domestic violence, assault causing bodily harm, and given that you are pregnant, the enhanced charge under this state's statute for assault against a pregnant person. The DA will make the final charging decision, but I want you to understand what we are moving forward with." I said, "What about tonight? What about the hospital?" She said, "The paramedic report, the attending physician's report, and the nursing intake documentation all establish what occurred tonight. That is independent of the 3-year documentation. Tonight alone constitutes the felony charge. I said, I understand. She said, is there anything else you want to tell me? I said, there is a civil matter running parallel. My attorneys will be in contact with the DA's office. There may be federal matters as well. I want to make sure everyone is coordinating. She looked at me. She said, federal matters. I said, yes. She said, Mrs. Whitmore Osai, how long have you been preparing this? I said, 3 years for the domestic documentation. 6 months for the financial. She was quiet for a moment. She said, I want you to know that what you did, the way you built this case, is going to protect you in ways that cases built under duress often cannot. You gave us something complete. I said, I knew I would only get one chance to speak. She said, yes. That's the thing. Most people don't understand that until it's too late. I said, I understood it from the beginning. Marcus was arrested that evening, not at the hospital. He had left the hospital after my father arrived and had, according to his attorney's later account, spent several hours making phone calls that were, the attorney would discover, not going to produce the outcomes Marcus expected. The people Marcus had expected to call in his behalf were, by that evening, receiving calls from other directions. The arrest was for the domestic violence charges. He was released on bail within 24 hours. $6 billion men are released on bail within 24 hours, which is a fact about the world that is not just and is real. And he walked out of the precinct into the specific storm of a story that had, in the 14 hours between his arrest and his release, become something that the press had found. I had not called the press. I did not need to. A story about a billionaire arrested for assaulting his pregnant wife at a hospital is, in the media ecosystem of the current world, self-propagating. It was found and it spread, and by the time Marcus walked out of the precinct, there were cameras outside, and there were questions being shouted, and there was the image, which I saw on a screen in my hospital room, of a man in a $6,000 suit walking through a crowd of cameras with the specific expression of someone who has not yet recalibrated to his actual position. He still believed he was the most powerful presence in the room. He had not yet understood that the room had changed. My daughter was born on March 29th, 11 days after the hospital room. Her name is Amara Emanuel Whitmore Osai, and the Emmanuel is for her grandfather, and the choosing of that name was the first decision I made as her mother that was entirely and only mine, without calculation or management, or the specific weight of living inside a situation that required those things. She was 6 pounds 14 ounces. She was born with her eyes open, or as open as newborn eyes are open, with the particular alert quality that makes some babies look as though they arrived already considering things. My father was in the waiting room. Yetund was in the waiting room. Sergeant Quarty sent flowers. Dr. Patricia Am sent a note that said, "The work continues. Your daughter will inherit the results." I held Amara in the delivery room and I said what I had said to her from the inside for 3 years, the thing I had been saying since before I knew she was there. I am working on it. I promise I am working on it. And then I said the new thing. I said, it is done. You are here, and we are on the other side of it now. The civil proceedings were filed 10 days after Amara's birth. Dr. Adiz Williams filed on my behalf, and the filing was comprehensive in a way that filings in high-asset divorce cases are comprehensive when they have been prepared for 3 years and supported by a forensic financial analysis of the defendant's assets. The filing included a claim for division of marital assets, a claim for child support, a claim for spousal support, a claim for damages arising from the documented domestic violence, and a civil fraud claim, separate from but parallel to the criminal and federal proceedings, that drew on Dr. Amo's financial analysis. The total value of the claims was, as the press calculated it when the filing became public record, in excess of $2 billion. I want to be very precise about something here. My father did not file those claims. My attorneys filed those claims on my behalf. My father's involvement in what was happening to Marcus Whitmore in the weeks and months that followed was not informal retribution. It was the application of resources, legal, financial, regulatory, that I had earned the right to deploy by building 3 years of documentation and 6 months of financial analysis, and that my father supported with the specific understanding that supporting them was not doing the work for me, but enabling the work I had done to reach its full conclusion. That is an important distinction. My father did not crush Marcus Whitmore's company. The evidence I built crushed it. My father made sure the evidence reached every room it needed to reach. The SEC investigation, which had begun with Dr. Williams's call on the morning after the hospital room, moved forward with the specific momentum of a federal investigation that has arrived with complete documentation. The investigators did not need to build the case from scratch. They needed to verify and expand what Dr. Amo had already assembled, which is a different kind of work and a faster kind of work. Within 60 days of the initial contact, they had expanded the investigation from the single insider trading case. Dr. Amo had documented to 4 additional transactions spanning a 6-year period. The total alleged proceeds from the fraudulent transactions in the expanded investigation were approximately $170 million. I want you to sit with that number, not because the number is the point, because the number represents 4 years of Marcus believing he was in rooms that no one was watching, and 6 months of Dr. Amo watching every room at once. The investigation became public in May, 8 weeks after Amara's birth. When the SEC investigation became public, the institutional investors who held positions in Whitmore Capital Group began doing what institutional investors do when a $6 billion firm's founder becomes the subject of a federal securities fraud investigation, which is that they began moving toward the exits in the specific careful way that large money moves when it needs to be somewhere else quickly without creating the appearance of panic. There was no panic. There was a systematic and accelerating withdrawal of confidence. Within 90 days of the public announcement of the SEC investigation, Whitmore Capital Group had lost 40% of its assets under management. 3 of its 7 offices had been quietly consolidated. 4 members of the 11-person board had resigned. Marcus's attorney reached out to Dr. Williams in June. He said, "My client would like to discuss a settlement framework in the civil proceedings." Dr. Williams called me. She said, "They want to talk." I said, "Let them talk." She said, "What are your parameters?" I said, "Amara's financial security in full. My full share of the marital assets with the forensic valuation as the baseline. The damages claim intact. And a public admission in the settlement documents that the domestic violence occurred and that the documented incidents are accurately recorded." Dr. Williams said, "The last one they will resist." I said, "I know." "It is not negotiable." She said, "Serena," I said, "Adiz, it is not negotiable. Everything else has a range, the admission is fixed." She said, "I understand." She went back to Marcus's attorney. The twist in this story is not the SEC investigation. I know some of you thought that was the twist, and in some ways it is the most dramatic reversal in the story, but it is not the twist I have been building toward. The twist is about Marcus's board. Specifically, it is about one member of Marcus's board who had been there for 7 years and who had, as I discovered through the discovery process in the civil proceedings, been aware for at least 4 years that Marcus had a history of domestic violence. Not from me. I had not been the first. There had been a previous relationship, before our marriage, in which a woman named Claire Delacroix had made a complaint to the board about Marcus's behavior toward her. The complaint had been received by the board's governance committee, reviewed in private, and quietly resolved with a settlement payment and a non-disclosure agreement. The board had known. They had paid for silence. And then they had continued to seat Marcus at the head of their boardroom for 4 more years while he married me and began the same pattern with me that he had used with Claire. When I found out about Claire through a document that appeared in the discovery process because Marcus's attorneys were not as careful in their document production as they believed they were, I called Dr. Williams. I said, "I need you to find Claire Delacroix." Dr. Williams said, "I've already started." Claire Delacroix was 36 years old and living in London, and she had, in the 4 years since the settlement, built a career in private banking that was significant, and that she had built in the specific way that women build things when they have been paid to be quiet about something and have decided to make the payment mean less than what they built despite it. She was willing to speak, more than willing. She said to Dr. Williams, who relayed it to me, "I have been waiting for someone to call." The board's prior knowledge of Marcus's conduct and their active concealment of it through the settlement with Claire transformed the civil proceeding from a divorce and damages case into something significantly larger. Dr. Williams added the board members to the civil action as defendants in their individual capacities. The theory of liability was straightforward. They had known, they had paid for silence, they had allowed the conduct to continue, and the continuation had produced the hospital room on March 11th and 3 years of documented harm before it. The specific board member who had personally managed the Claire Delacroix settlement, a man named Gerald Fitch, 64 years old, with a personal net worth of approximately $300 million, retained separate counsel the day the amended complaint was filed. Gerald Fitch's separate counsel called Dr. Williams 3 days later. Gerald Fitch was prepared to testify about everything. The trial did not happen the way Marcus expected it to happen. I want to tell you about the courtroom because the courtroom is where the story reaches the place I need it to reach. The place I had been building toward for 3 years in a hollowed-out book on the third shelf of a library in a penthouse where I was not safe. The criminal trial for the domestic violence charges was scheduled for September, 6 months after the hospital room. Marcus's attorneys had spent those 6 months attempting to manage the situation with the specific tools that are available to $6 billion men in criminal proceedings. Excellent legal representation, aggressive pretrial motions, the suggestion of alternative explanations for the medical evidence, a character witness list that was extensive and impressive. What they did not have was a way to manage the documentation. 3 years of journal entries, dated and detailed. Photographs from a prepaid phone with unalterable metadata establishing date and time. Medical records from 3 urgent care visits, now re-annotated by the attending physicians in the context of the complete picture. The paramedic and physician reports from March 11th. The nursing intake documentation from Meridian Medical Center. Sergeant Quarty's report. And Claire Delacroix, who flew in from London and sat in that courtroom and told her story with the specific contained power of a woman who had been paid to be quiet for 4 years and was done being quiet. My father sat in the second row of the courtroom on every day of the trial, not in the front row. The front row was for me and Dr. Williams and the support attorneys and Yetund, who held my hand on the first day and who I did not need her to hold on the subsequent days, because by the subsequent days I had arrived at the specific calm of a woman who has brought everything she built to the room where it was always meant to arrive. My father sat in the second row with his hands folded in his lap and his expression showing the quality I have described. The stillness that is not passivity but accumulated force held in reserve, and he watched. He did not testify. He did not need to. What he had done was not something you testify about. What he had done was ensure that every door the evidence needed to walk through was open when it arrived, which is what fathers who have built something from nothing know how to do. Marcus was convicted. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They returned on a Thursday afternoon in late September with the verdict, and the foreperson read it in the specific flat voice that forepersons use for verdicts. And the flat voice said guilty on the felony domestic violence count, guilty on the assault causing bodily harm count, guilty on the enhanced charge for assault against a pregnant person. 3 counts. Marcus sat at the defense table in a suit that cost more than most people's monthly salaries, and he heard the verdict read, and I watched his face from the row behind Dr. Williams, and what I saw was not the collapse of a man who has been found out. What I saw was the specific expression of a man who has, for the first time in his adult life, been in a room where his power did not change the outcome. The room did not reorganize around him. The room held what it had. The sentence was 18 months, with additional conditions including mandatory participation in a batterer's intervention program and a permanent civil protective order in my favor and in Amara's favor. 18 months. I will not tell you that 18 months is enough for 3 years of what he did. It is not enough. The law produces what the law produces, and the law's production is not justice in the pure sense, but it is accountability in the documented sense. And accountability in the documented sense is what I had been building for 3 years, because it was what I could build, and what I could build was what I was going to use. The civil settlement was reached 4 weeks after the criminal verdict. I will not tell you the specific numbers, because the settlement agreement includes a confidentiality provision that I agreed to in exchange for provisions I valued more than the public disclosure of the numbers. What I will tell you is that Amara's financial security is established for her lifetime. What I will tell you is that the forensic valuation established the full extent of the marital assets, including the assets Marcus had attempted to shield, and that my share of those assets reflects the full forensic value. What I will tell you is that the damages claim produced a result that Dr. Williams described as the highest per incident domestic violence civil award she had seen in 22 years of practice. And I will tell you that the settlement documents contain a signed admission in Marcus Whitmore's own handwriting above his own signature that the documented incidents of domestic violence are accurately recorded and that they occurred as described. His handwriting, his signature, admitting what he did, that is what I would not negotiate away. Not the money, not the asset division, not any number, that admission. Because money can be spent and assets can be managed and numbers are numbers. But a man's signature on a document that says in plain language that he did what he did, that is a different kind of reckoning. That is the specific kind of accountability that cannot be managed or minimized or explained away in the rooms where he would go after this to try to rebuild something. Wherever he goes, that signature exists. The SEC proceedings were resolved separately, in a consent decree that required Marcus to disgorge the approximately $170 million in alleged fraudulent proceeds, plus interest plus penalties. And that imposed a permanent bar from serving as an officer or director of any public company. And that did not require an admission of guilt, because that is how SEC consent decrees work. But that existed in the public record with enough factual specificity that the practical effect of the admission was achieved. Whitmore Capital Group survived technically. It was restructured under new management. It is smaller. It is operating in 3 cities instead of 7. Whether it will survive in any meaningful form over the next several years is a question that its new management is working to answer. I do not think about Whitmore Capital Group. I think about Amara. She is 4 months old as I tell you this story. She is the most alert person I have ever been in a room with, which is saying something because I have been in a lot of rooms with a lot of alert people. She has her grandfather's quality of stillness. She has her mother's quality of, I am told, the specific look of a person who is building something even when nothing is visibly happening. She is building things already. I can see it in her face when she looks at the world. I am going to make sure she knows what the world can be built into. I want to tell you about the broader thing now, about what this story means outside of the specific facts of my specific life. There is a specific taxonomy of silence that surrounds the marriages of powerful men. The silence is maintained by many things simultaneously: by the power differential that makes speaking costly, by the legal and financial resources that make the powerful man's version of events the default version, by the specific social architecture of worlds where $6 billion men are always in rooms with other powerful people who have reasons of their own to maintain the architecture. The silence is real, and the silence is not simply the product of fear. Some of it is calculation. Some of it is the specific rational understanding that speaking without preparation produces outcomes that are worse than the situation being spoken about. Some of it is the work of building what needs to be built before the speaking can happen. I am not telling you that silence was the right choice. I am telling you that preparation was the right choice. And I am telling you that the difference between silence and preparation is the journal, the photographs, the attorney you call before anything has happened so that she has instructions waiting when something does, the forensic accountant who spends 6 months reading what is there to be read, the bag packed 8 months before you need it, the prepaid phone in the hollowed-out book. The difference between silence and preparation is the work. And the work, I need you to hear this, is survivable. It is more than survivable. It is what produces the morning when you walk into a room where the man who believed you would always manage around him finds out that what you were managing was not yourself but him. The documentation, the financial analysis, the attorney with 22 years of experience, the father in the second row. I managed all of it into that courtroom, and the room did not reorganize around Marcus Whitmore. The room held what I had built. I want to say something directly to the fathers. I want to say something to the Emmanuel Osais of this world, to the fathers who build things and who raise daughters and who believe, because they have raised their daughters to be strong and capable and prepared, that their daughters will come to them when they need to. That the raising will have produced the asking. Sometimes it does not produce the asking. Sometimes the daughter who was raised to be strong is strong enough to manage a terrible situation for 3 years without telling you, because telling you would mean making you carry something that she is trying to protect you from. My father said to me in the hospital on the morning after I had told him everything, "Serena, I would have carried this, whatever it cost. You should have let me carry it with you." I said, "I know, I'm sorry." He said, "You don't owe me sorry. You owe me the understanding that carrying things alone is not strength. It is the appearance of strength while the actual strength is in the asking." I said, "I know that now." He said, "You knew it before. You were protecting me. I understand why. But I want you to know for the rest of your life that I would rather have been called 3 years ago than have arrived at a hospital room in the middle of the night." I said, "I know." He said, "And I want you to know that I am here. For everything that comes next. For Amara. For all of it. I am here, and I have always been here, and you never have to manage alone again." That is the thing I want the fathers in this story to hear. Your daughters sometimes protect you from the worst things. Sometimes the best thing you can do is make them understand, before anything happens, that the protection is not required, that you are built for the carrying, that the asking will not break you, that you are there. If you are watching this story and you are somewhere inside the silence, not the preparation kind, but the kind that is fear and isolation and the weight of carrying something alone, I want to say something to you that I mean completely. You are not alone. The documentation is survivable. The attorney call is survivable. The bag packed in advance is survivable. The morning you finally tell your father or your mother or your yetund is survivable. The hospital room is survivable. The courtroom is survivable. The verdict is survivable. And what comes after the verdict? The morning with Amara in the room that is mine, with the light coming through the windows of a home that no one in it is managing the temperature of, with my father's number in my phone and Yetund's voice on the other end of it, and Dr. Ammo's signed report in the files and Sergeant Quarty's card on the desk. That morning is not just survivable. That morning is everything. Build toward it. Whatever you can build. Start where you are. Build toward it. Subscribe to Black Diamonds right now. Please, hit that notification bell. Drop your name and your city in the comments below because this community is built for this story, and you are exactly who it is for. Drop a heart if you believe preparation is the form courage takes when there is time for it. Drop a heart if you have ever been the daughter who protected her father from knowing. Drop a heart if you are a father sitting in the second row. Drop a heart for Claire Delacroix, who waited 4 years for the call. Drop a heart for Amara, who arrived on the other side of it. Drop a heart for every woman who has a hollowed-out book on the third shelf. This is Black Diamonds. We see you. We have always seen you. Next week on Black Diamonds, a woman who discovered that the house she lived in for 11 years was not in her name. Who found out on the morning her husband filed for divorce that the real estate attorney he had used for every property purchase in their marriage had been instructed from the beginning to title every asset in the name of a holding company she had no legal connection to. What her attorney found when she traced the holding company structure. What the judge said when the full asset map was presented. And what the forensic accountant found in the holding company's tax filings that changed everything about the case. That story is coming. Make sure your notifications are on, because what the judge says in that courtroom is not something anyone in that room was prepared for. Until then, this is Black Diamonds. We see you. We have always seen you.